Pretty intro slide for
I
the
will
intro
do
part.
that.
So you can
Excellent.
see our faces times two.
Okay. So I am Katie Scott. I'm the Youth Homelessness Program Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. I will mostly be tech support on this presentation, but I may chime in here and there as this project was definitely something that um, Lauren and I had many discussions about over the last couple of years and are really excited that it's being brought to fruition. So Lauren, go ahead. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Katie. Hey guys, I'm Lauren Leonardis, or L. I am a consultant of Rind and Reason Consulting, and yeah, really excited to be here with everyone today, and get to introduce this tool that I've poured so much of my time into over this past year. Yeah, let's just keep going forward. Awesome. So I would love to get a great sense of who else is here. If y'all could just tell us who you are. In the chat, if you want to share your name, role, location, what brought you here today, maybe even what you're trying to learn here today, anything like that. And Katie has a poll set up that's going to come up so that we can get a better sense of what the roles are in the room to share with you.
All right, give me 1 second on the poll. Oh, my poll is not working. Hold on 1 second.
Um,
Womp womp. I'm already failing on my tech support duties. Yep, everyone just keep introducing yourself in the chat, and hopefully I'll be able to throw up the poll in a minute or two. Might end up being a little a slide or so in the presentation.
Oh, good. If anything, just make sure you include your role in the chat. Mostly, I really would love to know if you're already doing it, which is perfect. Your COC lead, if you're a Youth Action Board member, if you are a Youth Action Board adult supporter, or any of those other roles, like what is your role in connection to your Youth Action Board?
And I can at least make myself useful and help look through the chat here as well. So I'm seeing a lot of COC leads. I'm seeing a lot of like COC specialists or special projects, YHDP case managers, an independent consultant is here.
Break time. I
Directors.
remember break time.
Yeah.
I actually knew those guys when they started Break Time Cafe. Because I started my youth action board in Boston. So welcome, Mallory. Little piece of my history there.
Amazing. Yeah. And then otherwise, just some program managers. Yeah, this is an amazing variety and people from all over the place. We've got Arizona, we've got Wisconsin, we've got Iowa, Alaska, West Virginia. So this is great.
Very
Massachusetts and South
exciting.
Carolina. Woo, very cool. All right, well, maybe that was fine. Maybe we just did a live poll instead.
Yeah, that's good. We did. So I'm
Sounds
glad to
good.
know this is awesome, and I'm glad to see some folks I'm familiar with. So hello to you, friends, and hi to my new friends who are here too. I'm excited to get to know you guys. We can go forward and just get started with the next slide. Okay. So before we start diving in and talking about the YAB milestone guide and worker tool, we really wanted to start with a baseline about the history of compensation for youth action boards and how we sort of got to some of the best practices and things that we now know today. I am one of the lucky people who's been doing youth homelessness work for like 10 plus years now. I started my own youth action board in Boston, as I actually just mentioned to Mallory a moment ago. Um, Literally like 10 years ago, which is crazy, maybe 11 years. Um, and back then, it was really normal for us to do stipends and a pizza. to do gift card and a taco, like whatever it was, right? That's how we paid youth action boards. And at the time, for the level of involvement that we understood and we knew how to involve young people, that was appropriate, right? When you're doing something that's like a focus group, or when you're doing something that's like inviting people to a one-off event or one-off thing, stipends and pizza is totally fine. But as time went on, and especially folks who were in YHGP communities, started really asking a lot of young people, asking them to step up and participate in leadership roles, to review things, to attend meetings, to participate in trainings, to do all of this additional stuff. We started crossing a little bit of a blurry line, right? We were calling them core members, youth leadership teams, not just YAB members anymore, or not just, like a focus group participant anymore. But we didn't update our compensation model. We continued stipending people. Um, but then we started calling them contractors or consultants because now they were crossing a taxable amount. Um, but now we've moved forward into the history to today where we've realized that hiring young people is actually the best practice when you're asking them to do these kinds of leadership roles and representation and training and the kind of work that they've been asked to step up into. And that doesn't mean actually that stipends and a pizza is wrong. It means there's a time and a place for it, right? Like I'm holding a focus group that is still a perfectly good, acceptable way to compensate people. But when we're asking young people to step into a leadership role, we've really moved into recognizing that we need to value and honor and pour back into the youth leaders by hiring them into those roles. But part of why I like to start with this compensation history piece is because we still see a lot of remnants of these past models in communities across the country. And a lot of the time when I am starting to work with a new community, and they're unsure of what to do, they're unsure of how to start figuring out their compensation model, they go, well, our neighboring county is doing it this way, so we should do it this way too. And I like to start by saying, they're probably doing it an old way and they haven't figured out how to upscale and do it the right way now. Um, Katie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think you described it just so perfectly. And I there's like one national youth person that always says, "I'm tired of hearing about people getting paid in pizza," and like it does still happen, like, and I think that's what, and like I think you said, like, it's just there's a time and a place, right? There's when it's appropriate, when it's not. It's great to always provide food when you can. But that's not like a replacement for figuring out what the appropriate, yeah, form of compensation is for a young person for the specific role that you're sort of asking them to, or that they're trying to fill. The only other thing I would say is just sort of here. I don't know. Do we talk about the youth compensation legal guide later? So maybe I'll.
Next slide, actually. Do you want to bring us to the
Okay,
next slide and keep
perfect.
talking?
Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, because I think the main thing, and this is coming from someone who is a lawyer who has had experience, like I used to work at low income taxpayer clinics. I've done tax prep through the United Way programs. Even I felt like I was sort of ill prepared to fully kind of understand the tax burden that a lot of young people face when they start doing this work. And so, that plus just hearing, sort of all the issues and confusions around this is why we embarked on a project to do the Youth Compensation Legal Guide with a work group that was formerly called the Youth Compensation Work Group, now moving into the Youth Economic Empowerment Collective, mostly because we feel like we've we've done not that we there's not always more to talk about compensation, but we felt like we've put out the resources regarding compensation that we can, and maybe move to a sort of broader mission. But the Youth Compensation Legal Guide, it's just, runs through pretty much anything you could possibly need when it comes to compensating your YAB members. So anything from tax law to labor law to contract law, to the effect of income on public benefits. We also talk about, like, there's a chapter on the administration of payments, which goes through the different payment apps and the pros and cons, and if there's any legalities to think of for using a particular type of payment. source, also any kind of policies that you might need to have in place to do this. So it really just goes through, a ton of different things that are really helpful. And I feel like it's fairly accessible, like it's not super long. The chapters are all about 3 pages, 3 to 6 pages long. So please check it out if you need that information.
And I'll also just say this compensation guide is initially what brought Katie and I together to continue doing this project, because, this is something that I've always been extremely passionate about and where a lot of what started creating this guide came from. And so it was a really natural connection to continue doing this work together and to make sure that this compensation guide had this additional tool for youth action boards to continue working from. So we've made sure those things are aligned and overlap in the places where they overlap. And they're both fantastic tools that y'all should definitely make use of. Um, Katie, we'll go to the next slide. So this is just a fun little transition slide because I thought it was pretty. But when we know better, we do better. But how, right? How are we doing that? How are we moving forward? The YAB milestone guide and marker tool. And so this is where we get to start talking about the tool and how to use that, which is, I think, what you guys are all here for today. Katie, take me to the next one. All right, so the goal of the tool is to help you create youth action boards or any kind of board. It doesn't even have to be youth. These things, these milestones and best practices really can be applied a lot more broadly than just to young people. So keep that in mind if there's other things that you want to try and use this for. It's very easily adaptable. But ultimately, the goal of this is to create something that is sustainable, supportive, and effective. So we're making sure that you are set up to scale the work based on capacity so that you're outlasting these ebbs and flows. I think a lot of communities struggle with that. They struggle with trying to go too big, too hard, too fast, and then they make something that's not sustainable because they didn't start with some of those core pieces. Um, Making sure this is supportive, that we're pouring back into youth leadership and making sure it's a beneficial two-way street and effective. You want to be able to meet your goals and ensure these goals actually make sense for your community and are in your lane. I think a lot of the time communities pick really cool goals, but then later on realize they've poured a lot of work into something that's actually not appropriate for the thing they're creating and building, and it takes away and it makes it really difficult to get back on track to something that is effective for your goals. So that is the ultimate goal of this tool and what it was created for to help you all do. All right, and so right now I want you all to make sure that you have your own copy of this. So I have made this fun little link for you to skip this step later on. If you click that link, it's going to take you directly to a screen that makes your own copy. I want you to do that right now. Take a second, click it, open it, make your own copy. Make sure you rename that copy with your own community name so that you can easily find it. But also because if someday you want to share it with me, I'm gonna have like 5 bajillion copies of this, and if they're not named right, I won't know whose is whose. Um, yeah, take a second and do that. Do 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 do. All right, I'm gonna assume most of you have got that, and if you haven't, the link is still in the chat, and we can move to the next step. Um, will you take me to the next slide? Thank you. All right, so you can even be looking along now that you have your own copy and this is open in front of you, but I'm just going to walk you through what's in this tool for a moment here. First, navigating the tabs. I know that not everyone is spreadsheet people. I love spreadsheets, but for those of you who don't live in spreadsheets, I know sometimes people don't realize there's little tabs in that bottom bar. So make sure you know where that is and you know how to toggle between the two different tabs. If you have that open, again, you'll see that in the bottom left corner usually. And one tab says guide and one says marker. So that's step one. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so on the guide tab, that contains a full detailed description of 17 different milestones and what progress towards meeting those best practices can look like. The descriptions in that are sorted from the best practice is met Two, that it is needed. Needed meaning you're kind of at like landing spot zero, like you've got scratch, or what you have is actually kind of harmful or negatively affecting things. These spots help you determine what you need to be working towards and how to identify what your gaps are, so that you can continue building from whatever you do have. We'll go to the next tab. Next slide, not tab. All right, the marker tab. The marker tab contains the tool for communities to actually keep track of your progress in areas of improvement that are still needed, and a quick reference key to help you select the right options. Um, this is intended to be an actual tool that you can make use of, that you can go through and ensure that you're keeping up to date. These things morph and change all the time, and I think it was really important to me to make sure essentially that if you don't have me working with you in your community, if you don't have me helping you through these steps, that you have me in your ear still, that you have all of this written down, that you can follow along and you know what I would have told you when you got to a certain step somewhere else down the line. Um, but also so that you can keep track and see your progress and how great you're doing. So yeah, that's that for that slide. If you can take me to the next one. So, as I said, it's broken down into the four different categories: best practice met and could be improved. These are both milestone reached. If you are in either a green category or a yellow category, then you have done it. You've reached the milestone. Something that you'll notice when you're looking through that tool is that a lot of the time the yellow column is extremely similar to the green column. The difference between the green column and the yellow column is that if you've reached yellow, you're good. You can stay there. If that's the best you can do, then that is good for your community. You are doing everything you can, and that is perfect. It'll tell you exactly what you can be missing to still have met that milestone. So there might be some things that if you have the capacity, if you have the space, if you have the staff and the time and whatever else, that you can really fully meet that best practice. But we also know that communities are different everywhere and you can't always meet the best practice. Sometimes you need to do like the best practice for you. So that is what you'll find in that yellow column. And that'll help you figure out like, oh, if I can only do one thing, like what does that one thing have to be so that you're still reaching the milestone. Take me to the next slide. All right, and so if your milestone is not reached, that means you are in orange or red. This doesn't mean you're doing bad. I will just say, I think that that means that we're all in different places of learning. And like I said before, when we learn to do better, we can do better. When we know better, we do better. So if you find yourself in orange and red, it doesn't mean you're a horrible bad person who's harming young people. It means that you're doing the work and you're using this tool to work through the steps to make the improvements that you need to. Um, but it also is that you need to be very careful when you move forward, especially if you already have young people involved at that point, um, because you're gonna experience a lot of instabilities that are gonna end up showing up in different ways that you don't even realize are connected to some of these milestones. If you take me to the next slide. All right, so actually using that marker tool, um, you'll see on each of the milestones on the marker spots, there is a little drop-down menu that you can select where you're at in there. Um, the date last marked column is so that you can literally see your progress and see how you've grown. I really liked that idea. I was really excited by it because I think a lot of the time folks don't realize how much they've done and how much they've worked towards. I've had wonderful communities that I've worked with for over a year at some points, right? And they feel like they're still struggling. And I'm like, but do you realize how much you've done and like how many cool things you've accomplished? Like you've just built this amazing thing. And yes, there's still work to do because this isn't easy. No one's going to call this easy. It's always going to be work running a youth action board or a board of any kind. But this helps you to be able to see how far you've grown and all of that. And then in that final column, the note or link to notes spot, really that's for you to use however is best. My recommendation is that you use that spot to write down the things you're still missing, like what's keeping you in the needed or must be improved categories. so that you can write down the exact piece that you need to work on. And to link to it, right? If you already have that document completed, if you already have that tool or that outline or whatever written down, then you can put the link right there. And this can then start to help you compile everything in one spot. So then when you have maybe a new funder reach out to you to say, hey, we're interested in, we can drop maybe five to $10,000 for you, but we need to know a lot more information. You'll have it all right there. You'll have everything in the same spot so that you can give them any of that information you need. Funders love data, and so the more you use something like this, the more you're going to look good to people trying to give you more money for the future. So definitely use that. Keep everything in one spot, and keep building forward. And I always say, like, even if you're doing something perfectly, if it's not documented, no, you're not. Unless it's written down, you're not doing it. So if you don't have a link to it, if it's not written down, then it doesn't exist. And if you lost your job tomorrow, the next person that came in would have to start all over because they don't have that process written down. So super important to have all those things written, link them in, put them in there, and have them all in one spot. All right. We're gonna go to the next tab. I keep saying tab. I need to get that word out of my head. So when we look in the milestones, they are broken down into three different phases. It's really important that you try your best to do these phases in order. A lot of the time, communities are just thrown in head first and they're expected to start things that are actually phase three things from the start. And that's what screws people all up. It makes it really messy and difficult. But phase one is all about establishing foundations and guardrails. Phase two is identity and roots. And phase three is established and connected. And then in my next slides, I will break down a little bit more specifically of what that means. So, phase one, foundations and guardrails. Within that phase of milestones, we're talking about all of the pieces that you actually need to have started at least before you have young people on board. I know that the major rhetoric has always been invite young people from the start, don't build anything without them. Actually, that is extremely harmful. And what you need to do is make sure that you've built the boat before you sink people. You can't invite people onto a sinking ship. You need to make sure that you've figured out some of these things so that you are ready and prepared to bring young people in and support them appropriately. Especially things like that capacity mapping, which I actually do also have. This isn't the tool we're talking about today, but I do have a tool for you to use if you'd like for the capacity mapping. That is, I think, linked in the overview for this document. So I can make sure folks get that later too. But especially things like that capacity mapping and support staff funding and budget piece and compensation, those top things have to be done 100%. Purpose and roles, rights, and responsibilities also really should at least be started. You can draft these things and then work on them and workshop them once you do have young people involved. We'll go to phase two. All right, phase two, identity and roots. This is where you do bring in young people and you start giving them the space to grow their roots, to figure out who they are in connection to you, what they believe in, what their purpose for themselves is, their mission, vision, values, all of those pieces. Establish this as a group. You can't write this part without young people. You need their input, you need their involvement for this. But everything you did in that phase one, the foundations and guardrails, helped create the container, the space, the guardrails, the place that all of this can now live. When you start doing phase two things without having done phase one things, these things can get, again, really, really messy because young people don't know what their container is. They don't know what the rules are of the game yet, right? Because you haven't written them. So making sure that it's really clear what that looks like before you get to this part, really, really helps you to move forward into phase three, which we'll go to now. Phase three is established and connected. Now that you have your foundations, your guardrails, your identity and roots, all of those pieces built together, you can now do the outward facing things. You can act as representation in your community, joining local community meetings, COC meetings, anything else going on in your community. You can start doing things like professional development, helping to train not just the young people in your YAB, but maybe your YAB is helping doing trainings and professional development for your programs in the community. Your YAB can have goals and projects and all of those things. You can't do a lot of these things unless you know what your values are, your mission, your vision, your values, all those pieces. Because if you don't know what those things are, then what are you representing? If you don't know what your mission is or what your vision is, then how can your goals make sure they're pointing in the right direction, right? So these three phases are meant to build on top of each other. And yes, a lot of the time you do it in like mixed up orders, and sometimes it does end up okay. But later on, if you're already very established, you're in that established and connected phase, you're already doing stuff in the community, you have a wonderful group, but you keep running into problems, it's probably because you didn't actually fully reach a milestone in those earlier phases. And now things, even though they've been working smoothly for a long time, are getting really messed up. So, Katie, I see you unmuting. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, we had a question in the chat that I thought might be worthwhile to address now if before we get too far ahead. So the question is for a PYD model, shouldn't the participants be involved in the rules, responsibilities, etc.?
Well, our next slide actually is just questions and comments. So, we can just go to that and start talking about any of those things that come up. I talk so fast, you guys. I'm sorry. Like, I feel like I could have stayed on some of these things more to give you more information, and I went so fast. So definitely feel free to add lots more questions if you want to in the chat. So for a PYD model, shouldn't the participants be involved in the rules responsibilities? So the answer is yes and no. A lot of the time we create something that, isn't appropriate for young people, because we create, too much rigidity, too much strictness, too much like adult-led everything. That's not okay either. The whole purpose of this is to really ensure that there is the appropriate amount of balance. We can't actually just hand all the power to the young people. When that happens, it's false advertising, right? Some of my dear communities that I've worked with for a long time have experienced something very similar to that, where they said, "All right, we're going to hand it all to the young people. They're going to create everything, the rules, the everything involved." And it turns into chaos no matter what, somewhere down the line, because they've falsely given power to young people that they didn't actually have. So it's important to make sure that you've established, that's why it's the foundations and guardrails. To build the house, you need to know where your foundation is, right? And so, yes, that's why those pieces, young people should be involved in sculpting and editing and working with you on, right? But they can't just entirely make that up, right? We can't just hand it to them and say, go forth, do whatever you want, because it's not actually true. And it creates a lot of tension and hurt feelings and lack of trust when your adult partners have to keep telling you no because what you didn't sit in the house that they didn't even build, if that makes sense. Sorry, I make so many weird metaphors. Did that answer your question, Lisa?
I was just going to say if Lisa wants to put in the chat like either a thumbs up or something, because I realize on webinar format, Lisa won't be able to to do much besides like throw up an emoji. Um, One thing I did want to say is, oh, Lisa raised their hand, which would let us be able to maybe call on Lisa. So give me a second. Or let's see. Okay, the question went back in the chat. But you as the adults shouldn't have it entirely established, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. It's really just about ensuring that you have set up, again, like the foundational pieces. It's not about establishing every piece of it. If you actually look back at the three different phases, those pieces that are in phase one are the pieces that the adults are responsible for. They are responsible for setting those up. But the identity and roots piece, those are all the pieces that the young people should be able to participate in creating. And if you have a really good partnership agreement, if you have a good connection with your adult partners, your host organization, then that host organization should be making space for you to make edits and make changes to some of those other pieces as well. It's really just about making sure that they have done the work to figure out how to hold young people appropriately so that they are giving the correct support to young people instead of just creating something that young people are going to slip through the cracks and feel, like they've been set up to fail. So that is why those pieces are written as you should have that figured out before you ask young people to be involved, because otherwise you end up really hurting young people. If I don't know what roles can exist, then I don't know how to involve you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just going to say too, Lauren, like that's so the first chapter in the legal guide is actually how nonprofit organizations work, because I think I've seen like so many times it's like young people are interacting with program staff, right? And like program staff who are like really excited and want to shift power to youth. And then suddenly you find out when you're trying to do a certain project or do something in a certain way, oh, there's operational administrative staff that is basically throwing up roadblocks and barriers. Now, it's not that the operational administrative staff shouldn't be open to youth feedback and like if we're asking youth to like do this and change the world and they can't even change our organizations, in my opinion, that's a problem, but there's the reality, right? Like you have to build within the reality that you have. And so I think, yes, setting it up, it sets it up for disappointment and for potential failure if you're not, yeah, building in that reality.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's really the point of it, right? Is that there is a reality, there is a capacity that exists. A lot of this ends up landing back on capacity. Um, because if I don't actually have the capacity to provide all the roles that the young people want, then I can't give that to them and I'm gonna have to tell them no, right? We only have so much time and we only have so much money. And if young people say, hey, we want to hire like 10 roles, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in a way that's appropriate and supportive and sustainable. So that's why that piece is really set up to be before involving young people. I need to have a good sense of what the roles that can exist can be, like what responsibilities can exist within the capacity that the host organization has to provide the support, both in the time and the money. But yeah, it does not mean that the adults should establish all those things and that it is unmovable. It means that they need to know how to move it and what walls can move before involving young people. Um,
Love that.
Mary, I see your question, and yes, 100%. Everything should be written down. When I'm working with a community, I usually help them to set this all up in one YAB handbook. Sometimes different pieces live in different places, but it's really important to have all of these things written down in a youth-friendly way. That's actually one of the pieces of the milestones when you look at the best practice versus needed. Um, if you don't have it written down, it doesn't even matter if in practice you're doing it as the best practice standard, it's still needed. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. I want to make sure I don't miss any questions
Do
here.
you see, so Jennifer's question, do you envision this tool as something that YABs and adult leaders are reviewing and selecting their markers together?
I mean, absolutely. I think that that should be the case. I think obviously the adult supporters, the hosts, whoever that is going to start using this on their own because there are pieces that should exist before a lot of YAB involvement, but that they should then absolutely be reviewing this together and using this in a way that is transparent and involves the young people, because that's going to help the young people also know what to expect, right? I think a big thing I see in a lot of communities is that the YAB members accept their stipend in pizza because they don't know that other options exist, for example. So having this tool, being transparent, sharing this best practice piece with other young people is going to help them to also know how to advocate for themselves and to hold accountable their hosts and adult partners to show them and say, hey guys, like, we're not doing this okay right now. What we're doing is not sustainable. And I know that because I can read about it right here and I can see that other communities are doing this in a better way.
Lauren, I'm going to jump over to the Q&A box. So
Okay.
Sonia asks, I'm helping to lead an international youth advisory body and set a standard of $300 per month for all our leaders, regardless of what country they live in. However, I receive from pushback from local staff that 300 means a lot more than in other countries because of conversion rates. Do you have thoughts around what the most equitable decision would be here?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the most equitable decision would be paying folks based on where they live, and ensuring that it's equal according to their living standards where they are. Otherwise, if I'm paying someone so differently based on the amount that their location needs to live, then I'm actually paying that person way less than they need, and way less than other people. So I would definitely think establish it based on where people are if you're able to.
Okay, there's a question from Marcel in the chat. So our organization has been recruiting for the YAB. However, we will not begin without our P&P established first. And then once we have our first meeting, the YAB will review the documents and provide feedback. Is that a good practice so far?
So far, I would say so. Yeah, I think that as long as you have, and by P and P, I'm assuming you mean policies and practices, whatever the other P word is, policy stuff, right? So yes, absolutely. I think as long as you've established those things and you know what you are working with, you know what your capacity is, and you know how you're going to go about supporting your youth action board, what you're capable of doing, then it's wonderful that you're going to have them review and help you give feedback on those things later on. That's great.
But just making that foundation first. I think that's like such a great like takeaway. If you take away one thing from this webinar, like build that foundation first. Someone was asking about do folks have so Susan says we're restarting our YAB under a new lead agency. What kind of application do you all use for joining the YAB? And they're a smaller COC if that makes a difference.
So after talking through these things, I also, would you mind pulling up the next slide for me, Katie?
Yeah.
Because some
Give
of
me
these
one
questions, I
second.
think I'll do my best to answer them for the general audience, but some of these things are going to be very community specific. And something that I have put in here that I'm willing to offer all of you who are in attendance right now is a 30-minute session with me to try and get more advice. I really want to make this thing as accessible as possible. It's important to me that especially communities who don't have technical assistants or consultants or a budget for that can access as much help as they can. So please, you can use my Calendly link to book 30 minutes if you feel like you need more individual support. And I can try and do my best to dump as much advice and information into that as humanly possible in that time. But for now, to somewhat answer your question at least, so the application should really depend on what the role is in your community. If you are doing something that is like leans more towards leadership representation kinds of roles, like those young people are going to be holding responsibilities and acting as representatives and doing the work alongside of you, then I like to try and suggest making a youth-friendly job application that's similar to what your regular job application process would look like. But if you're doing something more advisory level, like they are not holding responsibility, they are just showing up to your monthly meeting or however what the frequency is, then you don't necessarily even need an application. Some people do like to keep it to a smaller specific group. In that case, I've seen some folks do instead of an application, like a group interview to see how the group jives together, or whatever other version of that there may be. But to answer that, I think it really just depends largely on what type of YAB member you're trying to involve.
Right. And there was, yep,
Cool.
a
That makes
thank you in
sense,
the
Susan.
chat.
I think if you don't know yet, then this is a great time for you to literally just use that milestone tool. It will walk you through the steps to help you figure that out, um, to show you like, what path you need to take forward.
Amazing.
Cool. Did I miss any other questions?
I think we got all the questions. There was definitely some shout outs of just like, this is fantastic. This is genius work. Perfect timing because like they're restarting a YAB. So
Great.
really awesome. Ooh, we've got a question from Hannah. What kind of fundraisers would you recommend for our board?
Um, Funding questions are always so sad for me because the answer is always that's so hard. But Hannah, where are you located? In
Oh,
Massachusetts.
yes.
Ah, lovely. Well, I'm also in Massachusetts. Oh yeah, where are you in Massachusetts? Were you the person I was saying hi to earlier? You're not. DCF. Okay, I'm also in Massachusetts. So hi, nice to see you. Weird weather we've been having, isn't it? Um, so it depends on where you're located in Massachusetts. I know in the Boston area specifically, Liberty Mutual has always been a really big supporter of youth homelessness related stuff, but they're very specific with it only being in the Boston area. Um, Outside of the Boston area, um, there's another one that I can't remember the name of. There's just other foundations that often like to support youth homelessness. I can't remember the name of the other one, so I'm sorry, but it's another very location specific one. In general, um, trying to find foundations or places that are willing to provide any sort of funding support for you. They all like to see what you could do with that money if you got it. So that's one of the steps that's in this tool. That's again the capacity piece of it. It walks you through how to create the dream budget version of things and the like realistic version of things. And showing that to funders is a really great way to get them to be like, aha, like you are doing good things and I could help you do more better good things. So I would suggest doing that using the capacity tool and then just, reach out to some foundations. It never hurts to cold call people. That's kind of part of what I used to do. Um, oh, fun, Susan. I'm actually going to be in Beverly next weekend, this weekend, soon.
Did you all see Marina's comment about fundraising, which I thought was a good one too, is like if possible to get it written into your, org's budget and let your development folks worry about the fundraising if possible. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is another one of those wonky things that a lot of the time host organizations will put that responsibility on the Youth Action Board. It's the host's responsibility to fund the project. Yes, absolutely, young people can and should help with that, but it is the host's responsibility and your community's responsibility and your COC's responsibility to actually get that funding to the YAB. That is again part of why those pieces are in the phase one stuff. Those are the things that your host is responsible for, right? So, no matter what phase you're in, if things are not working, if those things are not fully met, they are the pieces that your host is the most responsible for. So hold them accountable and tell them they need to fix some stuff if they're not going well. Cool. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any more in the chat or the Q&A.
Cool.
Just some different suggestions about funding and funding being an issue. So, yeah.
Do people know that thing about raising their hand? Do you guys, if you do want to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
to us if anyone wants to, if it's easier to talk to us and you're having a hard time typing in the chat, if you raise your hand, like if you click the little button that says raise hand, Katie will actually be able to unmute you so that you can talk with us.
I'm gonna try that feature now. Does it work?
There you go.
Okay, cool. I
Yeah.
just to elaborate on what I was saying in the chat. So I moved into my role at United Way after serving in a fundraising position for the last 3 years, and so
Hmm.
having that inner knowledge of how a development team crafts a budget, it's really for those of us who are in these adult advocate spaces for our YAB members, it is our position to advocate to our teams to have that put into the budget.
Yes.
There will be pushback from your development teams, but ultimately these grants exist. There are private foundations and private funders who want to support youth homelessness work. And it is the responsibility of your fundraisers to find that money. It is not your responsibility to find it. It is not your YAB member's responsibility to find it, but it is your responsibility to push your development team to ensure it is included in the budget so they can push your board of directors to ensure that it is approved in the budget. So if you have a lead agency, that is going to be, your key role in ensuring that your YAB stays funded outside of government funds. You want to diversify your funding streams because YHDP might not exist in 6 months, you know? And so that's my pro tip as a former fundraiser who's now developing a YAB.
Marina, big applause to you. Yes, exactly that. Everything Marina said. Actually, Katie, call Marina up next time we need to talk about this.
Yes. Very good. Yep.
Awesome.
And feel free if anyone wants to raise their hand, we can get you off mute.
While we're hanging out, let me drop this Calendly link in the chat for folks if anyone wants to use that. Um, and then if we can just pull up the last slide so that folks have our contact information if they need it. There we go. I'm not going anywhere yet, but I wanted to just make sure because I see some folks are leaving. This is how you can contact us, and thank you so much for being here. But yeah, feel free to reach out to either me or Katie if you have any questions or you want to check in about this tool. And again, I'm more than happy to meet with any of you if you feel like you need more help and you want to talk through more specific community questions, or maybe you just couldn't think them through right now in this moment. Please feel free to book a time with me. That 30-minute slot for you is always open. Since you've been here, I'd love to help you. Um, and yeah, I really do believe in making this as accessible as possible. And I can only give so much of my free time, but I want to pour as much of it in as I can. So yeah.
Lauren, it's so generous for you to offer those 30-minute consulting times. Like that's such a valuable like add-on to this webinar. So appreciate it so much. I am gonna let Susan talk. Let's see, Susan, can you unmute now?
There we go. I
Yeah.
think I appreciate what Marina was saying. At the same time, I think we also have to remember, like for me, I'm Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, my Ohio County part of my COC has more funding opportunities available than my other four counties of my COC who are rural and don't even have homeless services. So the majority of ours lie in one county of our COC. And I know, like, for instance, my balance of state, who has 44 counties in West Virginia, parts of theirs are exceptionally rural well. So whereas the development team sounds great and all that, my COC employs me. Um,
Yeah.
so we don't all have that ability. Now, again, in Ohio County, I have more ability than my Marshall, Wetzel, Brook, Hancock. They're just smaller. And unfortunately, what we are, I mean, the new NOFO comes out in June, as we all know, but we inherited the previous NOFO from the old agency. So what we have is what we have. So we're kind of working with what we have. So I think when
Right.
you get up and talk about development teams and that, I see somebody else saying, yeah, Susan, we don't have a development team. I think we forget that we don't all have that.
So, Susan, I'm so glad you pointed that out, and thank you. And yes, what Marina said is wonderful, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's the greatest potential way forward to do it. And we don't all have that, right? So that's actually a big part of why the very, very first number one milestone is capacity mapping.
Yeah.
To understand what kind of time, what kind of resource, what kind of money, all of that do you have to put towards this? Because you can actually only build your youth action board within whatever that box of the host's capacity is. So if your host doesn't have the capacity to pour into that and you don't have a team and you don't have the staff and the hours, then you might be stuck trying to make something really, really small. And that's okay as long as you've appropriately planned for that and you've planned for it to be as sustainable as possible. So if you need to build small, but know that going into it, figure out your capacity. I just in the chat dropped that capacity mapping tool that I mentioned before. This is a separate thing that I've also made. Um, I made this because this is basically what I walk my communities through when I'm doing consulting and TA with them, to help them figure out what they can do, right? Because I really want to focus folks on not planning something too big. So feel free to make a copy of that capacity mapping template as well, especially if you're in the very beginning and you haven't figured it out yet. That will help you to kind of figure stuff out.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you see there's a question from Nikki in the chat? How do you feel about YAB being on contract instead of on staff?
How do I feel about that, Katie? That's a great question. And Nikki, I'm really glad you asked it. So I think that for the vast majority of young people, it is not appropriate for them to be contracted. Obviously, there are some young people who do operate as consultants and contractors, and that is totally great. And I am big thumbs up to them. I was one of them. I'm still a contractor and a consultant. And I started when I started my youth action board 10 plus years ago. However, for the vast majority of young people, you're not going to meet the legal requirements around that. And I'll hand that to Katie to actually talk more about.
Yeah, it's really tough because the independent contractor laws are pretty clear that an independent contractor is someone who has a special skill that you're hiring to provide a skill to your organization that's not core to your mission. So, like a perfect example is like a web designer. We're not a web designer organization, so of course we're going to contract, with a web designer, likely than hiring them in-house. But if we were going to contract with someone to do, let's say, state level youth homelessness policy work, we do that. Like we get funded to do that. That's part of my job description. So that would really be like on the edge because that's part of our core mission. Also, if I brought that person on as a contractor and I had to train them a bunch to do that, advocacy work, that also bleeds over the line of what's appropriate for an independent contractor. So, yeah, so it becomes really tricky to be able to make what's commonly a youth action board work fit into an independent contractor bucket.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that the biggest piece of that I see come up in communities is that young people do need a lot of support to do this work. Obviously, we are all very differently able in different points of our journeys, but if they need to be trained and supported and, prepared and like given the materials to, then they can't be a contractor. It's also just extremely unfair for an organization to decide that it is easier to make a young person a contractor because they don't want to deal with the tax burden and figuring that out. Because actually, what they're doing is just passing that burden to the young person. So anything that you think is easier about it to like just slap it as a contractor and call it a day, it's actually not. It's way harder. We're talking about young people who sometimes are still very close to their lived experiences of homelessness even if they've moved on and they have stable housing and all of that now. Um, they're probably not making more than, the average person who's not making very much in your area, right? So giving them a contracting role and expecting them to now have to budget appropriately, to have to pay 30% of that in taxes, to have to keep track of all of their receipts and expenses. Y'all, I pay a tax guy and he costs me like $200, right? Like that's how much it takes to do all of this work. It's a lot to keep track of as a contractor, and it's not easy. And passing that burden to someone else is just making it hard for them as the individual when it really should be the host's responsibility to manage all of that. Um,
Yeah.
Susan,
There
again,
there is
that
a okay. Yeah.
I see the question. Yeah. So for everyone else who maybe isn't looking at the chat, the question is, do you pay per meeting and what is a typical stipend? Susan, it really depends again on what kind of Youth Action Board member involvement that you are looking for. If you are looking for something that is strictly advisory and that is the capacity you have and you can't do more than that, then um it's appropriate to pay at least like the thriving living wage for your area. I think that's usually around like 25 to $30 depending on where you are per hour. So if you have an hour and a half meeting, then you could pay a stipend of whatever. I can't do math, y'all. Whatever that amount ends up coming to.
45 or something. Yeah.
Thank you. Usually I recommend you at least round it up to 50 because, they had to get there somehow. So if that's the kind of involvement, um, well, Susan, what I'll point out is that Youth Action Board members are not working full time. So actually, when we're asking them to participate in something like the Youth Action Board that they're only showing up to once, twice, maybe four times a month, depending, they're not making that much either, right? It's just the motivation to get them to show up and prioritize this over whatever their other job is, or their life, or their kids, or school, or anything else. And so it's easy to fall into like, I'm not making that, so they shouldn't make more than that. But keep in mind that we're talking about like a very tiny, teeny fraction of the full week of whatever's going on for stipend payment. But now, if we're talking about hiring a young person in a leadership role, in a part-time leadership role, maybe, um, then usually places match that to whatever the appropriate level is within their organization. And that can really range a lot depending on the kind of organization you're in.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, like, yeah, there's obviously differences of cost of living, just like the international question that makes sense for equity. And yeah, just keeping in mind if they're going to have to pay taxes on that $50 because they happen to earn over the threshold, then it's 30% less, right? Because self-employment taxes are really burdensome. Um, there was a question just to us hosts that I want to highlight just about paying undocumented youth.
Mhm.
And that actually might be an exception to sort of the contracting question because undocumented youth are legally, any undocumented person can legally form a business in this country generally. And so I have had young people essentially form an LLC or contracting business in order to be able to work with our organization. Of course, all the independent contractor rules apply. So generally, it's important that that person is sort of aware of that and sort of trained up and is available and ready to operate as an independent contractor to do that. But that is a way you can, legally pay a business entity even if the person is undocumented. So, and then they'll have like a employer identification number rather than social security number that goes on the W-9 form.
And Marina was pointing something out in the chat that I'll also highlight. The threshold for when you get taxed usually has been about $600. So if you got more than $600 in stipends, then now it's taxable income and it has to be reported. They've been fluctuating that number a lot over the last few years. It's been going up and down and everywhere in between. Currently, this year, I believe it is $2,000, as Marina said. However, I would not trust that. I would not plan around that to stay consistent. So my recommendation would be to still plan as if it's going to be $600 so that you're not accidentally building out a model for your YAB that now you need to scramble and fix in the future. Like, don't use that taxable threshold as a reason to skimp out on not meeting some of your other milestones, essentially, right? Like, yeah, maybe you could pay them that way, and it kind of gives you a loophole for certain pieces. But you'll see when you go through the milestones that even if you do it that way, there are other milestones that you then will not reach because you're not engaging youth in a leadership capacity.
Lauren, if I could just
Yeah.
amend, I think you probably saw my follow-up to that. The way that we've been considering it is it's kind of like our borrowed time. So
Yes.
it gives us a little bit of additional time. We have a little bit of a cushion to play with right now while we are in the process of building out that capacity for our long-term goals. So understanding that there is a little bit of a cushion at the moment, taking that up while we can use it, and using that as time to build out a plan that works long term.
Definitely. Yeah, Marina, I appreciate that as well. Gosh, you're so full of brilliant commentary. I'm so glad you're here. Um, Definitely. I think that especially when you've already involved young people, when you need to come up with a Band-Aid right now solution, then do that so that you're not causing more harm. But this is part of why I say that you need to figure some of these things out before involving young people so that you have a plan established and don't need a Band-Aid solution. When I'm working with a community, I often tell them, like, don't get scared, but I have to tell you that your compensation model is currently illegal. Please don't panic though. Like, you don't need to fire everybody and kick them out right now. We'll come up with a plan, and work towards that, and you'll be okay, right? So all of these milestones, they are things that you should be working towards, and you can create long-term plans and steps towards getting there. And whatever band-aid solution you need to do, if you already have young people involved, then that's appropriate as long as you are minimizing harm as much as humanly possible. I've also been in some communities where the harm couldn't be minimized and they had to temporarily pause their youth action board because of it. And that's also okay. Don't try and claw and hold on so tightly to something toxic and harmful when maybe the right answer is just don't drive the car if you don't have the baby buckled into the car seat right now. Like, don't go anywhere, you know? Um, yeah.
We just got a question to the host as well about the source for the self-employment threshold change. I also was just doing a quick review because so for 2025, it was definitely so there's always a little bit of confusion. So basically, $600 is when organizations are generally required to provide an informational return to the IRS, like basically saying, hey, this person earned $600 or more on a 1099 form. But the responsibility for people to start thinking about who are self-employed about paying their taxes is actually at $400. So once you hit $400 as a, self-employed earner, that's where you have to start to think like, okay, maybe I will owe taxes depending on like my other income and what's going on, with my taxes in general. So we do so basically like what we recommend from the youth compensation work group is like if you have earned really any income from self-employment, you're getting paid to do various focus groups, YABs, other kinds of consulting work. Like you generally want to gather that information, gather all of your expenses, and um, maybe go to one of the free United Way tax clinics and have them work it through and figure out if you're going to owe any taxes or what you would need to file, or utilize some of the resources that exist just for like free tax filing. But basically, yes, like if you're at $400, like that's where you really need to start thinking about it. If we do, like Marina, if you have a site for the 2000, because it might be that like organizations only have to report at 2000, or maybe sometimes it's like Venmo, PayPal, Cash App only has to report once it hits 2000. It's all actually like stupidly confusing, and I'm so sick of it. But here we are. Go ahead, Marina.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So, this is something I actually just did a freak ton amount of research on because we have a lived experience advisory committee that we've been working through this process with. And I did read where this is written into the law. It's written into the Internal Revenue Code. And so in HR1, the Big Beautiful Bill Act, it is a subline that amends the amount in the Internal Revenue Code. I believe it's 1040A or something like that, is the code, but I can email you the exact one. And then it also had a separate amendment for digital platform transactions that upped it to 20,000 for those. So this is just regarding W-9 employees. So non-employee compensation, or W-9 or for 1099 MISC or anything like that. It moves up to that $2,000 mark. But I will send you, I literally with a fine tooth comb went through the entire like law to try and figure out exactly where it matched in.
Hmm.
Got it. Yeah, and it's possible that like the IRS hasn't implemented 2006, like guidance or rates yet. So if like Big Beautiful Bill decided to up that to 2000, it might be that like for 2026, it might be that the IRS just hasn't put out their implementing documents yet.
They
But that
did.
$20,000 threshold for the payment apps, that is like a good reminder that like you always have to just track your own income, right? Like if you're self-employed, and for young people to understand that it doesn't matter whether Cash App gives you a 1099. Like if you earned self-employment income on Cash App, technically your responsibility and your tax liability is still there, whether they give it to you or not. Yeah. And go ahead, Marina. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. So it is inputted in the IRS like updates for their 2026. I did see it on the
Okay.
yeah. So it was
Cool.
section 6041A of the Internal Revenue Code that was changed, and it's in the Internal Revenue Code on, I think, is it congress.gov or something like that. It's on a house.gov, uscode.house.gov website where it's been updated.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments? We've got time. We booked this to be longer. I talk way too fast.
I did realize that yeah, well I was glad that we booked it for what it was, just in case we did have like a ton of questions, but I was just in the habit of booking 90-minute webinars for the series that we've been doing. So
Oh,
I booked
actually,
it.
though,
Yeah.
I just realized it's been a lot longer than I thought, too. We've almost made it to the 90
Yeah,
minutes. Nice.
absolutely. Oh, thanks for putting in the citation
Cool.
there. Thank you. Yeah, the IRS website still does seem to be kind of not updated though, so maybe with their lack of staffing, they'll eventually get around to it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep our remaining 34 people waiting if we've got nothing else. Last call for questions, comments, anything. If you guys need it, let me know. Cool. If you want to book
Yeah.
something, I already see some people booked with my Calendly link. Definitely do that. Feel free to reach out and email us if you have any questions. And yeah, make use of that tool. I really poured a lot of my heart into it. I really want to help you all access the most resources you possibly can when you don't have TA and you don't have a consultant and you don't have me or somebody else helping you walk through these things. So I really do hope that it is helpful for you. Um, and yeah, best of luck. I hope I hear from all of you soon and all the wonderful things that you've gotten to do.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lauren. We appreciate it so much. This tool is a complete gem. We're so proud that you were able to do it, and it's so good. Just please see all the great love in the chat that you're getting.
I
It's
see it.
been just
I
so
love you guys.
appreciated.
Thank you, thank you. Ah,
Amazing. All right, we can wrap up the webinar now. I don't know, Lauren, do you want to stay on for a minute just to
Yeah, I'll stick on for just a
debrief?
minute. Yeah.
Fabulous. All right.